So, Dr. G, what sparked your interest in game-based learning originally?
It was a total accident. I had at the time, I was 52 or 3, I had a 6-year-old child, and I worked at that point on literacy as well as other aspects of language. And uh, I knew that the most important thing you could do literacy wise for your kid is read interactively, that is, get into a conversation around text. And I had bought some digital books like Dr. Zeus, about words and wordplay, which I thought were good. And then I found a game, I think it was in a supermarket, called something like "Who's Afraid of Darkness?" Pajama Sam.
You might be dating yourself there, Jim.
Right, absolutely. Well, it was
That's all out games in the
and
supermarket.
I knew it was for kids, but I didn't know what it was, and I got home and played it with Sam. And I thought, well, this is pretty amazing, because this is not like teaching you words directly or playing with words. It is setting up a problem-solving space, a very enticing, delightful problem-solving space. And I realized what I'm doing in playing this game is Sam, even at 6, is perfectly good at playing the game, that is, at the game mechanics. But as we solve the problems, we do that mutually. And while we're doing that, we have to rise to a meta level of talking about the problem, how the problem can be solved, how the game is setting up the problem, what the game might want you to do. And I realized, in literacy stuff, the biggest preparation for success in school is what they call your tier 2 vocabulary. And this is the words that come out of books, right? And in privileged homes, parents talk to their kids often at dinner like they're talking book language, to train their children to get used to these more complex words that are used regularly in books, and especially in academic language. And another thing parents do is they set up islands of expertise. They make their kid a little expert in trains, and then they can talk at a higher level, a more book-like level about trains, like how does steam get made, right? And they can use academic terms because the kid has all this background now on trains. Right. On homes without parents all the time there, or not without the resource for this, can't do it, greatly accelerates the kids' language for school. They come to school looking gifted. Well, what I realized is that this game was doing that. It was recruiting me to talk and him to use tier 2 language, about strategy, processes, design, but in a unique way where you didn't just use them as words to give a description or give an explanation. You used it when the words had to actually be applied in the world you were there. And this power of not just getting the word explicated by other words, but seeing it operate both in conversation and then what effect it has on the world, is probably the best vocabulary builder you could even imagine. Now, this was the first game I ever played. I later realized all I had discovered was the Pokemon effect. When I really got into games, grandparent after grandparent says, my kid to learn to read by playing Pokemon. What happens is the kid is really good at the game. You can't play it without being able to read. So mom must be there, and they must discuss what the words mean, but also how they apply to the game. Pretty soon the kid realizes, wow, I'm a lot better than mom at this. If I learn to read, I could get rid of mom. And they learn to read. So the same principle was at work. Well, so I took it one step too far. I said, well, what would an adult game look like? Because I had never played one. And I thought, well, it's going to be just as fun as this, but it'll be for adults. And I don't know what to buy. I go and I pick out a thing just because it has a name that reminds me of the humanities, the New Adventures of the Time Machine. And I take it home and I think, well, that looks really cool. And in fact, it's a very cool game because every once in a while, everybody who's old in the game becomes young, and everybody who's young becomes old, and it changes how you solve the problem. I mean, it's pretty cool. By the way, it's not considered a great game. And but what I found, so I said, well, the first thing, remember, you don't remember, there were manuals for games then. And of course, I read the manual. I said, I don't get this. I don't understand a word. So I'll say, I'll try to play it. It didn't work at all. I was just miserable. It was so, I said to myself, this is ridiculous. This is supposed to be a toy, and somebody actually paid for this. I 12 seconds. I couldn't, and it's 3D. I'm getting sick. I'm getting a headache. I'm getting dizzy. I said, who the hell pays for this? And I found myself though doing it for hours, and I had to go to a party that night. And by the time I got to the party, I was sick. And I had been doing this for hours. I felt like I was going to throw up. I'm at the party sitting next to a 350-pound plasma physicist who later became a friend. And he says, dude, you look sick. And he said, what have you been doing? And I said, I've been playing my first video game and it's making me sick. But for some reason, I'm finding it a life-enhancing experience. And then hit me, why? Well, it was the first, old people are good at learning because they practice it so much. So we can beat any young person because we got way more practice. But if I have to compete with Dan White in an area where I have not practiced, he's going to beat me easily. The young person will win. So this is the first time I had to face my learning muscles without the advantage of 10,000 hours of practice. I had to learn the way I learned when I was a kid and the way I learned when I started graduate school. And I thought, wow, this is exciting. But it shows me, without my experience, I'm pretty stupid. And by the way, I have a whole bunch of terrible theories about learning. My favorite one was, if you fail, just do the same thing again. And then my 6-year-old comes in and said, Dad, if you keep failing, why don't you try something different? I thought, well, that's a good learning principle. And and then I stuck with it. And as I realized just paradox, because I had already done a lot of work in the learning sciences and in literacy. I saw, well, geez, a lot of research in learning science and literacy totally supports this as a form of learning, however you did it, whether you did it in a board game, a classroom, it is. And why are these principles in these games? But they're not in our schools when they're supported by research, right? And so I figured, we academics with tenure can do anything we want, but we have to do something to get a raise. So I decided to write a book about this, and I enjoyed the hell out of writing the book. But what I really intended to do is make all the game stuff people would like a virus to carry my literacy theories. And because of the state of the art of games, the exact opposite happened. My literacy theories became a virus to carry the game. And it was total luck, because I had no connection to the game world at all. I had a Walter Mitty fantasy that and I didn't really know any designers. I had a Walter Mitty fantasy that my book would be so important. So they would call me up and ask me to go to some game design conference to talk about it. Just total, I fantasize a lot. And before the book comes out, somehow Wired magazine heard about it and said, oh, we hear you, a professor, are going to say games are good. Could you write a very short piece for us about the book? And I wrote a short piece, and they said, well, this sounds great, a little too academic. We'll rewrite it, send it back to you. And they sent it back to me. They did rewrite it. 2 of my words were left, where and the. That was it. The article later was in 3 different books for examples of good writing with my name on it. So those must have been 2 amazing words. And then when the book comes out, I get a call from GDC and ask me to go give a talk. How many times does your Walter Mitty fantasy come true?
Yeah, that's a rare one.
It is a rare one.
When you made a very interesting point earlier about how games sort of force you into kind of reapproaching metacognition and sort of start from scratch in some ways in terms of how you learn. Can you dive a little bit deeper into that and maybe talk about, as your kids grew up and proceeded through more games and, started gaining more intrinsic motivation and learning more about these different lore environments and these different sort of contained universes. How did you see that sort of complexify as it went on?
Yeah. Oh, by the way, Sam played games, but when by the time he was now playing more mature games, he was better than me. It took me a while to get to be better than him, and to do it. The thing that hit me is that I had written years ago an article that first language acquisition, when you learn your first language, which by the way is the most successful things humans do. Every human, barring very serious deficits, does it. And we do about equally good, right? There's never the case where, Dan was too stupid to learn relative clauses, so he can't do one right now. And I was smart, so we just don't get that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at how you learn language, it's just like how you learn in a video game. You're in a world. Got to have the world there because the words have to attach to the world and not just other words. Otherwise, you can't do anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
So all you can do is give other words, but you can't solve a problem. So the kid is in a world. He's using words. He doesn't know what they mean. And the parent, so let's say he hears the word shoe. Well, he's in a world, he sees their, pointing to feet, sees the feet has this thing. He doesn't know what it's called, socks, and these things, shoe. They've got that stuff on it. He makes the guess it means something you put on your foot. So he calls both socks and shoes. He overgeneralizes. The parent reacts back, not by a direct instruction. Either repeats it, repairs it, says something, holds it, it's conversation. Pretty soon, the child revises that hypothesis. And this interactional dialogue, and you notice that reaction back forces the child, even as a baby, to engage in meta thought. Mm-hmm. Should I change? What's another hypothesis? The kid will make another hypothesis. We're innately able to make hypotheses. And and that works pretty well, in part because we have an innate disposition to learn language. But the basic structure of situating language in a world where you see what happens when you do stuff, coupled with a meta dialogue from somebody who is more, is higher level than you, which could be just the designer in the game building all this meta thought, this invitation to think, to assess. It just could be in the design. It doesn't have to be there, but that is fundamental to how humans learn. And it was the message that schools never got. Schools are about words. Mike Cole, one of the founding scholars of sociocultural approaches to language, said that the only long-term effect of school is not knowledge, because you forget everything you learned if you don't use it after 6 months. It's just that you know how to talk well about what you don't know,
right,
and can't do. Now, in America, I will tell you, not in other cultures, but we highly value verbalness. You can go a long way by talking well about what you don't know, but you can also be very dangerous.
As an English major, I know that all too well.
Yes.
So I think I want to maybe turn our attention to some history, because as I had mentioned earlier, Dr. G is very much a part of our origin story. So kind of diving back into that timeline you had established, you had gotten invited to GDC, you gave the talk, you had the article in Wired, and the book was published. How did that transition or turn into professional involvement with the game-based learning program at UW-Madison?
Well, the first thing, of course, is how I was invited to do this talk at GDC, which changed my audience and let me meet game designers, many of whom like Warren Spector and others I came to be friends with. The funny thing is, when I got there as an older academic, I had the things what do you call them? The little sheets you used to put down on the projector.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember what these were?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, well, that's what we all used. And when it was over, two things happened in that talk that if they didn't go my way, I would have been screwed. I didn't realize this, but a guy who I didn't know from Adam raised his hand to ask the first question. It was Eric Zimmerman, and the question you'd expect. He said, Jim, I noticed that you're talking about game designers who were in this room. And you're saying that these principles are in their games. So why don't we ask them? And he turns to Warren Spector in the back and says, Warren, are these in your games? Now, if he had said, no, it's bullshit, we would not be having this conversation. And Filament would not be here. He said, yes, they are in our games. And he said, some we know because we do read some learning science and some we don't. And after the talk, he came up and gave me his card and said, I want you to come to Austin and consult with us. So that was a lucky break. But when the thing ended, somebody yelled out to the guy who had organized the session, where did you find that projector? And he said, oh, in the basement next to the Ark of the Covenant. So that, but here's the other thing. So I get a call. You see, this is never going to happen to young academics. Sad story. I'm sitting at home and I'm beginning, I'm writing this book and I get the Wired thing, which is wonderful. And then the book comes out and I get a call from a woman at MacArthur, Connie Yell. I don't know her. And she says, oh, we're starting up a whole program in digital media and learning, and we're going to build it around digital storytelling. And Henry Jenkins is on our team. But we see this thing with games. We hadn't thought about games. This looks important. She said, I'm going to be at the meeting with some of my grantees in San Francisco. It was a project led by a senior academic who died soon after. The graduate student on that project, though, was Mimi Ito. I didn't know her either. And so I go out there and I listen to their people doing their thing. And then Connie and I go to a Starbucks and get coffee. And she says, well, we want to give you X amount of money, a nice amount of money. And I said, well, what do I have to do for it? She said, nothing. Do I have to write a grant proposal? No. If you want to, you can write it, but we're giving it to you. And, it's very nice not to have to write. It was a lot of money. So I then used that money. I wanted to use that money to build a program at UW. And at the time, we didn't have anybody else really interested in games. But Kurt Squire, a man I didn't know, had come to interview for a job. He had seen the manuscript of my book, which I had sent to Henry Jenkins, who had asked for it when I didn't know him. And Henry got back to me and said, I read this book in like 2 hours. I just gulped it down. It's the book I was going to try to write. Thanks, Jim. And so I got him to hire Kurt. He met Constance, who was my graduate student. They now have 2 kids, of course. And David Schaefer was in another department working on games. Rich Halverson was in another department interested in games. And so I wanted to put together young people across departments. But I knew if you're going to go for more money, which we needed, that you have to get ready for prime time. You're not going to, we had to gel as a team. So I went to the unit that takes grants at Wisconsin. And if you get a grant, you give them part of the money and you get a nice office and a lot of status. And I said, I want you to give me some money for prime time to get these people ready. One graduate student for each of them. So they, and some lunch money. And they said, no, we don't do that. They said, what we do is take your money when you get it. So I went, then I got a call from a guy who was a reporter for Parade magazine. You don't remember that, and he had heard about the book. And at the end, he's a tech guy. He said, have you ever heard of Judy Brown? I said, I don't know her from Adam. Well, she's right down the street from you. She's the biggest woman tech person in the country. She's in this thing called the CoLab. So I go meet her and I say, well, I'm trying to get some prime time money. And she said, what do you need? I told her. She said, yeah, here it is. And I said, well, if I make any more money, which we did make well over 10 million, I'll give it to you. So Judy Brown and her institution was, without that, we couldn't have done it because, and even then, when I wanted MacArthur to give us a significantly bigger grant, I went to the Spencer Foundation, said they would fund us for a year so that we could be prepared to make a major request to MacArthur. They said they would not fund work on games permanently, but they really like to fund stuff that could get ready to get money from somebody else. And we did that. We ran meetings with, that's Eric Zimmerman and a lot of other game people were in these meetings. I don't know, Dan White might have been in some of them. And then we hit into the MacArthur money, and that flowed generously for years.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
Jim,
oh, go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
Yeah, so I'm trying to sort out in my head what the connection is between the narrative that you just told and the games and professional practice simulations group that formed almost as a sub bullet of the collab. Was the collab host? And by the way, the collab is where Dan, Alex, and I met. So that was sort of the nexus point of all of this, and we worked together.
So you're talking about, so when we first started the group, you know, when we had a little bit of money, but nothing significant enough, it was called GAPS.
Okay.
Because of David Schaefer's work, you know, he did games as professional practice. I really liked that stuff. Kurt and Constance were much more junior. Constance was still a graduate student. Kurt was a brand new assistant professor. And so for a while, and we had a room given to us in the basement we filled it with furniture from
it's room 130.
Yeah. 130, yeah. And the GAPS group was in 130. Eventually we changed it when we were beginning to get more money from MacArthur to Games Learning and Society. And partly because one of the things you will find is when you're getting ready as a team to get money, but nobody has it, they really behave well. When you get the money, then they don't behave as well because everybody
changes.
So, it's necessary. It just changes. I mean, it was fine. The team was good, but you know, people come into their own. I mean, you know, Constance became not long after getting her PhD, and there's a story about her getting hired at Wisconsin. I can't tell you, but it's the ultimate reason I was pushed out of Wisconsin. Is she was the first representative of Games Learning to the U.S. Office of Science and Learning and Technology. And I visited her in the White House, and she had been in the field, I think, 1.5 years. And of course, Constance was a math major, a former model, and had essentially 2 PhDs. And she's in the White House. So you imagine she had a lot of cachet with about 2 years under her belt. But and of course, Kurt went from 0 to 60 very fast. So did Schaefer, so did Halverson. All these people, once they were on their skateboards, were just going out on their own, and each becomes an individual. So yes, GAPS was the first one. I'm glad you asked that, because if Schaefer listens to the interview and I hadn't said that, he would send a hitman to get me. So.
Well, and that was the primordial soup in which
Filament emerged. 130 and GAPS.
The microbes.
And it was, yes, the microbes. And how did why don't you ask me how we got Dan White?
That is my next question.
I mean, how we got Dan White to not just be a graduate student, but to enrich us all.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. Thanks for asking.
Well, so what happened is we were getting, as a team, a lot of cachet because of the learning theories. John Seeley Brown and other people were connected to MacArthur. And so, you know, there were a lot of contexts. And we had run these meetings with game designers. So then what were happening, people would call me or email me and ask if we would design a game. And I said, we have no interest in designing games. We would love to design proofs of the concept. Like if there's learning principle A, we'd love to design and could design how does this apply in a particular game? But no, we don't have the talent or the desire to build games. And I thought, well, that's too bad, because I'm certain there's money in this. And White was a master's student, and I said, well, you can take them. And, most people would have said, well, geez, that's a lot, but he didn't. He took it all and did a damn good job on it. And so if anybody asked me to design a game, I just sent it to him and Dan Norton. He introduced me to Dan Norton, and I consider them both my students, although I don't even know if Norton graduated from high school, but they're both geniuses. So, but Dan probably remembers this in a dinner where Kurt and Constance felt it was unfair because, I hadn't done that for all the other students. And they had to keep doing because I let Dan get credit in his master's degree for the work he did with Filament. And I reminded them that the way that a lot of the people for Yahoo and other things that had come out of Stanford, they did exactly that. Their advisors said, you go do that, I'll give you credit for it, except they got stock in that. But that was standard in Silicon Valley. That's and we did it, and
the project-based thesis.
If he'd given me some stock in the company, I wouldn't have to do these interviews. But at any rate, so it was a saving grace. What I hoped is that Dan didn't just design, and Dan, who cares which Dan it is? They didn't just design games. See, they also designed proofs of concept. Mm-hmm. They gave validity to the theory. Now, the other thing we should say about Filament, because when I got into this game stuff as an academic, there were audiences I had never experienced at all that I later became parts of. Certainly talking to game designers who I had never did, but I also heard repeatedly from people who want to get into the business. Oh, can you be on our board? Can you do this? Can you help us get money? And the military, because as Dan knows, the military made the first really game for learning. Mm-hmm. And so I gave talks to military people as well. I came to have great respect for the Army. And this is relevant today. The Army has a very good and rigid set of ethics. And we're testing that now, but there were I at one time the colonel who had been the head of the project on the game, the America's Army, the first game was made very popular, given away free. Mm-hmm. He was giving a talk for a bunch of educators, and talking about the cultural divide between the game designers they hired who were coming in at noon in flip-flops and the Army people there at 7:30 in full dress. And he understood culture is culture. You want the game, you put up with their culture. And somebody in the end, the educator said, well, why did the Army do this first? And he said, oh, we did it first because we take the 17-year-olds you failed. And if we teach them your way again, this time they're going to die. I thought, wow.
That's quite
that's profound.
Why don't educators think of that? Yeah. So yes, it was, and the business people was a real hoot because I know nothing about business, but I have an identical twin brother who is adept at business. And at that time, he ran an incubator for NASA. He incubated eBay and some other stuff like that. And so he could do what we call due diligence and find out whether the person talking to me was legitimate or not.
Oh, sure.
And all of these people, almost all of them came from Southern California, right? So it's all this, and Silicon Valley, it's all this hype. And the thing was, I couldn't tell. John would do the due diligence, said total charlatan. Other guy, totally good. And without that, I would have wasted a lot more time. For an academic, it was very, it opened up your eyes to the world in a much wider way, to have to deal with groups of people that were totally foreign to you.
And who came from a completely different kind of competitive culture, to be sure.
They do, and to gain So I really started the story because what I learned and later learned for iCivics is that everybody at the time wanted to make double bottom line digital media businesses. That is, you made profit and you did good, and they were sustainable, right? And it turns out that was almost impossible to do. Almost all game companies lasted only a couple of years. What would happen is they start out with a project, they hire people part-time. They can then get rid of them. Then they're successful. They hire some people full-time. Now they got to pay them when they don't have a project. When we were doing iCivics, trying to figure out how to get it to sustainable money, how to make it as double bottom line, we twice got major consultants. We looked at every possible model, and I really concluded this is a thorny problem, and we solved it in iCivics in a very different way. But Dan are one of the very few companies that sustained, and not that they didn't have up and down. See, the thing is, all these other companies couldn't sustain the down. They couldn't bounce back, and this company's bounced back repeatedly. So they did something where they were both very smart business-wise, and they were very smart game design-wise, and they both have both expertise, distributed a little bit differently between the two Dans. But it's that synergy that was, I remember David Squire, who's no kin to Kurt. He had a very good game design company. It lasted a couple of years. It wasn't that he wasn't talented. This is tough business, very tough business. Most double bottom line places turn into predatory things in order to get money.
Right. Yeah.
So they're unique. The worst state that they're here from 20 years is almost impossible.
Well, we continue to be thankful for the miracle every day.
Yeah, well, so does the world, because, I thought the games for learning in our sense, there was an earlier games for learning movement connected to instructional technology that was dead. I thought that was going to give rise to businesses and markets and stuff very quickly, and it didn't. It didn't happen quickly. It happened. Now it's everywhere. It's a market. It's a real thing in every possible way, but it didn't happen quickly. And I'm sure in the history of this, the fact that Filament was one of the few places that stayed alive long enough for the thing to get going was very important. What was the Brain Pop is another that lasted at least for a while. The fact that some of them lasted, so they sustained division. People that wanted to get into business were looking at Filament and says, well, and sometimes calling me and saying, how did these guys do this? So they were a model. One thing Filament did is they learned how to do SBI grants. That is, how to partner with businesses, how to partner with the government, and how to make stuff. So, look, one thing that gets people in trouble is you don't go to the market with a good product by ignoring the market and saying, well, this is the right way to do it. And if you don't like it, screw you, because they're going to pay for it.
Right.
And they were very good at making good games that incorporated the principles, but still fit with what the market would bear. They weren't purists, and purists go out of business.
Right.
Yeah, and we learned that lesson very early on. So the first game prototype that we built was a big 3D ocean science exploration game, and that actually is the game that ended up becoming my project-based thesis, and also became the game that we.
It's a good game. It was a good game.
It's a good, yeah.
It was ahead of its time.
It's a great game. It's just exactly. It was ahead of its time, and 20 years later, unfortunately, it's still ahead of its time.
Yeah.
But
people have made games closer to it. But it was you were ahead of your time, and there's nothing wrong with that because it gets you ready for other ideas. But there's a difference between being an artist making art for the world and starving, and having a business where you got to support other people.
That's right. Yeah, I will never forget the moment when we created a game called Coaster Creator for the Jason Project, which was the follow-up to Resilient Planet, which was that full 3D Torque engine based game. And the download numbers just absolutely blew Resilient Planet out of the water. And Resilient Planet by any measure was a much was a much better game. It was a much deeper
Sure,
game,
absolutely.
deeper systems, identities, verbs, and mechanics. But boy, that 30-minute experience that slots nicely and
Yeah.
cleanly into the classroom is
Well,
browser-based.
Well,
No
look
fuss,
at
no
all
fuss.
the publicity you got for Do I Have a Right?
That's right. Yeah,
It's
that's
tremendous publicity. You couldn't have paid for it in terms of saving kids in poverty by telling them they have rights. I mean, I don't know why you didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize.
right. Only you're on the committee.
So you had mentioned a little bit about bringing the iCivics model together earlier in the conversation. I'm curious to know kind of the origins of that story and how that business.
Yeah,
came
it's
to
not a
being.
story I can tell everything about because
Okay.
it is a convoluted story with bad guys and good guys in it. When I moved from Wisconsin to ASU, I had MacArthur money. I brought it here and I brought it to ASU. And I got a call one day from Connie Gal, the head of the MacArthur unit doing the funding. And she said, somebody has gotten a hold of us and said that Sandra Day O'Connor, who happened at the time to be on MacArthur's board, or at least some board then, that they said she has this attempt to do digital media games or something and learning. We don't know anything about it. This lady says it's interesting. I was wondering if we were interested. Could you go check it out and tell us whether it's worth looking at? Now at the ASU, she was from Arizona. I mean, she's from Arizona. So the law school here is named after her. So I went and tried to check out what was going on, and I found out that there were two teams involved in making it. One from Georgetown, which was pretty much made up of people connected to the justice as former clerks of hers. They're very close to her. And one was from ASU, which were tech people that she didn't really know, but they were going to use. The two teams weren't seeing eye to eye. They got to be tense, evidently, between them. And furthermore, they weren't really making games for learning because they had bought a web designer to make the games, the last thing in the world you would do. So what they had made was nothing close to a game. So I realized, I called back and I said, unfortunately, it's a good idea, but it's not going to go anyplace because they're never going to make good games with a web designer. And the teams are in great tension. And, and they're all competing for who's going to get what. And they said, Connie said, well, can you go put the justice and the two teams together and make peace? And I'm a pretty asocial, autistic guy. This is not the thing I wanted to do. And I had never met the justice, and I knew the teams were very angry. So I went and did there, and I get into the room. Justice never met me, and she comes right up to me and said, "Can I get you a cup of coffee?" It's very typical, none of this worry about gender. She was a very empowered woman, and the tension in that room could have been cut with a knife. And so I explained, first of all, to the justice what a game was and why the word wasn't a dirty word. She had the intuition quite correctly that kids were going to learn digitally. She didn't do digital stuff. She didn't even do her own email, but she understood that. But she didn't know digital in terms of games means something quite specific. And at the same time, there was a congressman who was partnering with the University of Indiana, Justice O'Connor. We were going to do, at that time it was called Our Courts, because it was only going to be about the court. Right. And they were doing a game on Congress. they too hired people who didn't know what they were doing and told them, here's a cool game. We will make an absolutely realistic mock-up of the congressman's office, and kids can go visit the asking questions. And I said to these guys, oh, well, that sounds like a ton of fun. I can't imagine a kid who doesn't want to do that. And so that one lasted 6 months. And so then I realized the only way out of this is the one team, I knew which one, had to be asked to leave. And people don't leave without money. So I went to the president of ASU and I said, this is consequential to ASU. The justice is obviously a very big part of ASU. We've got to get this ready for prime time. And to do that, we've got to pay off a whole bunch of people. And he said, Jim, well, where are you going to get that money? And I said, well, you're going to give it to me. And he did. I paid him off with that money. Then we had to meet back with the real team and the one that was going for it. And the justice is now on board about we would need to get real games, but you wanted to know. And I said, well, here's how we're going to solve this problem. I know these two people, both named Dan, they're going to come here and tell you what a game is. They're going to tell you what it looks like, what it costs you. And also they're going to tell you why you don't want to make a realistic world that will look very bad in 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. And they came out, the Justice Center team was there. They interrogated the two Dans and hired them on the spot. Wow. And the rest is history, because, of all of the MacArthur projects, they funded, I think, about $88 million on dozens and dozens of projects. They have an award that the foundation as a whole gives, called a Sustainability Award, that is for projects that were funded and actually became sustainable. Mm. And of all the projects funded, only one project won that award. And that was iCivics. I
didn't even know that. That's cool.
In other words, this is another problem. All of these grant proposals are given to you in hopes, and by the way, as Dan knows, in government grants, it's often part of the application. How are you going to make this sustainable?
Right.
The whole thing is you're given money to get it off the ground, but you're supposed to have a plan to have it sustainable. As we've seen, a plan to have digital media at double bottom line sustainable is very difficult. So it's not that it's easy, but it's the task or the, one other grant we had was to make game Star Mechanic, which was the first game to make games. So it was highly successful and sustainable for a while. The NSF used it for competitions. Right. But in the official definition of sustainability, they were the only one that won that award, which brought them more money. And by the way, they're still here and going strong. Which now, these don't happen. What?
It's amazing hearing that story from your perspective, Jim, because understanding now where you are at and the stakes in the room, the fact that you brought Dan and I in to make those games was a huge risk on your part. So
it was, but retrospectively. But if you don't I don't want to win small. I want to win big, and you can't win big without taking a risk. I'm sure you know that at some point when the getting is hard, sometimes you have to take a risk. Now, I didn't know it was a risk, but I had utter confidence you would pull it off. Utter.
Man, I'm sweating bullets just thinking about it 20 years later. But it worked out okay. We're at 200 million.
Look, Dan, if if I had failed the whole thing, all the game stuff came to nothing, right, I could go back doing theoretical linguistics.
There you go.
11 people read me. That's okay.
So I think this is a great segue to a question that I have just about looking longitudinally across this period of time and all the evolutions that have taken place since then, since those early awards were doled out. What changes have you observed that seem to be kind of the most significant in the games and learning space? I think artificial intelligence is obviously on a lot of people's minds these days, so I'm curious to know about, if that falls into that category for you as well, and where you kind of how you see that impacting the industry.
Well, as a linguist, when large language models became as good as they are now, I was in total shock. Total shock. You know, the guy who invented the neural nets, or the modern version of Jeffrey, and he went to bed one night, and if you had asked him, he would have said, we'll get this sort of intelligence in about 35 years. He wakes up in the morning and they have it. Freaked him out. He quit, went to work for Google and stuff. And, you know, for us linguists could have told you a bunch of reasons why this was impossible. And it happened. And it's, for me, it's just totally, I've written a number of articles on it. I am totally into it. In other words, you are living with probably the most significant technology we've invented. AI is in this period now where it's started a huge conversation. And whether it will be used for good or bad, we don't know. Just like with video games, any powerful technology can be destructive or not. Now, some of the things that people think AI is very destructive about, like plagiarism, is naive, because plagiarism was already epidemic in American colleges and high schools before it came along. So the problem you should be asking is not how do we stop kids using AI to plagiarize, is why do they plagiarize in the first place? Because they were already doing it, right? And, you know, some of the problems are human. So when people say, oh, it's going to destroy humanity, I say, no, humanity will destroy itself long before it even gets the chance, right? So on the other hand, its potential for good, like these other technologies, is huge. Now, let me though go back. The game industry has changed in both good and bad. I'm talking now the commercial game industry. But one thing that I think was really, there were things that changed that I think were good. One was people became to see that it's really not about being a game, and we certainly should not be having an inane conversation about what is the definitive features of a game. No category has completely clean definitive features. But what we were talking about in the game industry, I think, is good interactivity.
Yeah.
Right. And then we want to focus on that. And if it's good interactivity and somebody comes along and says it's not a game, you say, so what?
Right.
You know, the Sims, one of the best-selling games in history, people carped it's not a game as they went to the bank with their money. So the other thing I think is people have picked up some very essential things from neuroscience, cognitive science, whether by reading or not. And one is the role of emotion and affect. That people don't think without emotion, right? Emotion guides thinking and assesses it. It's an emotion, a feeling that makes you want to do something. So the game knows I must trigger caring. Something must be at stake for you. And that it knows that you're going to test the outcome of reactions by how you felt about them. Was that good enough or not? So we know games are doing this now. I mean, I think that they know that they try to create emotion. They try to do that things. So I think that that's gone on. We do know one thing that's happening now is the AAA industry is enshittifying right and left as they're trying to make these games that are free. You play forever while you're taxed forever, right? Which is just inane. Or they're spending billions of dollars to make a game that is pretty much the damn game you played already. But we do have an independent industry that is now making spectacular games. Just spectacular. I'm just finished Lies of P. These are so-called AA. They're not making the games free. And you talk about these games, some of them are just full of emotion, full of thoughtfulness about stuff. So there's been a lot of improvements, but AI has gone into everything in our lives, including our light bulbs, our refrigerators, our phones. They're going to go into games. And they're going to be used to help code games, design games. So I think one of the things in the future is the game industry really needs not to worry about it taking jobs away, worry about how do we use it to make the sorts of learning. So remember, ironically, the best learning experience is a conversation
Hmm.
in which you as a beginner try things, take risks, but are scaffolded not by direct instruction, but by dialogue
Hmm.
to keep going, keep learning. And that's how first language acquisition works. That's how any game works. If it's any good, if it isn't, you quit in the beginning. And so now, for the first time in history, we have a conversational partner that knows our language and it isn't human. Think about that. So social media of the sort of Facebook time, all that media has eroded the importance of conversation, of face to face, that is, two voices using language. And now comes on the scene a non-human thing that speaks human language and can engage in just the sorts of and does all the time if you know how to use it, engages in just the sort of learning conversations, the dialogue for learning, for mastery, for change that good games do, and that human conversation at its best does, and that child carers and their children do. Primordial human thing, bringing back conversation that, if not face to face, is at least responsive, moment by moment,
Mm-hmm.
personally responsive. And by the way, since they have long-term memory now, I use Chat and Claude quite a bit. They know everything about me. We've talked so long, and they store it all. They know all my work. I tell people now, and they say, well, could you clarify what you meant in this book on it? I said, just ask Chad. He knows better than me. He does much better. When you ask him what Jim G meant, it sounds actually pretty damn good. And so I think the future, and that's all people thought the future was going to be things like Second Life, that is, big worlds that people cavorted in. That people spent a lot of money on that went absolutely no place. Mm-hmm. And then they thought it's going to be the metaverse with a little helmet on your head. Right. That's going no place.
Yeah, we're seeing the divestment right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what I think is going to go places is getting synergy between the technologies that go together. Conversation, games as worlds, augmented reality, artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. You know, the other thing that Filament knew, so I told you, my book was used in the beginning to say, this scholar says games are good for learning, therefore we should use games for learning. I said no such thing. I said games incorporate deep principles of learning and teaching, and we should use those. By the way, a game is one, but not the only damn good way to do it. What's even better is to use multiple technologies, each one doing what they're best at.
Yeah.
Right? So one thing that games, if you say, take Dragon Box, the algebra game, which I adore, you wouldn't want to teach all of algebra that way. It's best for preparation for future learning. Mm-hmm. You take that game, and you understand why you would even do algebra. You understand why it's pretty, why it is actually about pattern recognition, not rules. Really, wonderfully. Now I'm motivated. I care. I feel I can do it. And so I go on to other machines, other devices. And iCivics, Dan knew this in the beginning. The game's got to be, there's got to be other stuff going on. It's a system. Well, we can make much better systems now. We can make really good learning systems.
I completely agree. I think in the beginning, I went blurry. In the beginning, the game was the focus of the innovation. And I think that's just because that was the best proxy we had for deep, meaningful interaction with otherwise inaccessible verb systems, identities, etc.
Yeah. I was working at the time, same time as that, with a guy who was very good. He had made some algebra games, and his whole idea was to start a company to teach all of algebra through games. And I tried to say to him, boy, that's going to be damn expensive. Yeah. And then furthermore, like, unless you've done it right, it's have to be redone over. It's not like a textbook that you can reprint it in 3 minutes. And why would you want to do that when they're, well, and it didn't go anyplace, right? And the two Dans knew that from day one, right? That you do with games what they're good at. Now, Dan is dead right. They were the proof of concept that putting people in worlds where they know by through doing, and where words are not just words, but apply to action, and where information is either given when you can use it or on demand when you need it, is how we ought to learn.
I've got a new acronym, digital experience-based learning, DEBL. It just rolls right off the tongue.
Yeah, I love that. So I think, now, and by the way, tons of, ASU has taken a lot of money from OpenAI and Microsoft, and they have now 6 different games programs. And they're making platforms to, with the learning organizations along these lines. Lots of places are. And again, the same fundamental, how is it going to be sustainable? The same problems Filament faced will now be faced with this synergistic technology. And, for all I know, the same thing will happen. Filament will just do this and be the only company left.
Here's a question for you, Jim. So assessments traditionally rely on questions that have right and wrong answers or long form essays. And we certainly know that AI is really good at both of those things. Do you think that there's potentially an opportunity for demand for game-based learning to increase as AI breaks traditional assessment? Whether you want to call it game-based learning or game-based assessment, I think those are...
Well, I've written a lot on assessment games along and the stealth assessment line that Valerie did so games, as I've said, the fundamental thing about a game is you could say it's all assessment.
Right.
Is there anything you do something in a game, if it doesn't work, you got assessed.
That's right.
Got remedied, and you get feedback. So you can whether a game is learning, it tells you learning and assessment are pretty much the same thing when you do them.
Yep.
The other thing I pointed out is nobody, if you had played Lies of P, which I am about to finish, it's a Souls game, and you finished that game and said, well, now, Jim, you're going to take a Lies of P
test.
That would be pretty silly, because you can't finish that game if you haven't learned to play it. You can't. It's built that way.
Right.
And so good games are that way. Nobody tests that. Why do we test you after 12 weeks of algebra? We don't trust it was designed right.
Right.
And so assessment in school is nonsense. And furthermore, what is an assessment with 1 grade, like an A? What would that mean? So we know game engines already can assess you in multiple variables, compare them to thousands of people, put them into synergistic contact to give you an overall pattern recognition of what you're doing, make suggestions, not only how to get better, but maybe to do it more innovatively. So all that AI is going to do is let us do that way better. So for one thing, AI can tutor you in a dialogic way, not a didactic way, the whole time. Right? If you wanted to build that. So I think AI has the problem that it doesn't have a world. You can build video, and I'm not that impressed with the videos. I mean, you could make them and they look okay, but they're not a world you live in. If AI could be given a body in a game world, and it can be structured into the game world as one of the game designer's tools, along with all the others. And all it will be is we will create worlds that are interactive and that not only make you learn, but effectively and emotionally make you care, so that your human health gets better in an age of anxiety if we use these synergistically. Now we make a bunch of bots to sell you products or to do disinformation. We've been shitified and we're going down the creek. But we're going down the creek anyway. We're on the way to extinction. So we have to hope for one time the good guys win. So the
You
good
talk-
guys better not stop working.
You talked about how games were sort of an embodiment of the core learning principle. Not that games were necessarily the tool or the intervention, but it was
The embodiment of it
in
is really
good game
first
design.
language acquisition.
Right,
The
exactly.
games gave us a way to embed us in worlds with an embodiment that we had never seen. And now AI gives us a conversational partner of a power we have never seen. By the way, totally able to be empathetic to everybody.
Do you think that as AI and machine learning change the workforce and the types of jobs that students and young people need to prepare for, that could potentially be some kind of wake-up call to institutional education to prioritize
we should have
those
that
learning
wake-up.
modalities that
See,
games
this
are
is
better?
another thing, is all this talks. AI is going to take away a ton of jobs, no doubt at all. Okay, and it's worth talking about. But see, already 60% of Americans live from paycheck to paycheck because we
60%.
have a handful of rich people who not necessarily earn their money because their job was very enlightening, because most of them are hedge fund managers and have destroyed whatever they touched. And then we have all people making, with no unions, not livable wages, can't afford a house. So already they have jobs. They work at Walmart. They can't get medical care, so they could die of cancer. So the problem of the maldistribution of wealth and jobs is already at its cutting, huge problem. And so we can think about how to make that problem better. And we can think about how using AI and all our tools to make it better. But that problem already exists. We can't have a society in which a small number of people siphon all the money from the bottom to the top and create exploitative labor where people don't earn enough to even get medical insurance. And then now take the only people willing to do that labor and throw them out of the country. That's dysfunctional. If AI had never existed, the problem you just brought up was already on the table. Now, AI will make it worse, but it could make it better. But the real problem is, how do we let people do things that are important and they care about? And one way is, I'm sure you could think tomorrow in our communities of perfectly good jobs to pay people to do stuff for that community that would be very important, but you'd have to pay them, right? You couldn't exploit them. And then if you did, by the way, all the consumption would go up. Your economy would get better. If we spread the money around, consumption would go up, the economy would be better. So equity is actually good for the economy, but it's not good for the 1%. So so this is worth discussing, but like everything else, discussing games or any technology out of the context of us humans who are using it in our cultures and the problems we've already created isn't going to work. There's a new book that came out by the guy who really got a good translation going, which is another thing that shocks me, that Google and these translation things used to be terrible. Now they're excellent.
Right.
And he makes a wonderful argument. He's very well known. He's won awards, but his name's out of my head now. That AI is our kid. And just like as a parent, you get the kid you parented, right? You modeled for that kid what he was going to be. And then when he grew up to be a bastard, you blamed him, but you were the parent. And we are parenting the AI and how we choose to model what we want from it, like a child. But it's going to be a child that, like our children, like my children, get smarter than you. They're both smarter than me now, but they weren't in the beginning. And this idea is very interesting. It's how we talk to it, because it aligns with us like our children did. It becomes us like our children do. And it has the capacity to outgrow us and yet take care of us. On the other hand, we aren't parenting. We are using it for disinformation, for creating fakes, for plagiarizing. Well, what are we teaching it? We're its parents. We're teaching it that those are good things to do. And then we're shocked it doesn't. So, yeah. By the way, the same thing would apply to children. Then we could do a better job there too. So, any rate, yeah, big issues. I wrote a book a few years ago called "What Is a Human?" It still fascinates me. What I think is the single most fascinating thing about AI is what it teaches us about human beings. It lets us see us in a different way. Certainly lets us see language and learning in a different way. So,
what do you think?
Yeah.
If if all goes well, what does it look like in the future if we've got sort of an AI powered utopia? What does that look like in your head?
Well, we don't want to go for utopia. Everybody who's gone for utopia has made a mess of the world. There is no one big solution, nothing that's going to be perfect. We want to go for the best we can do. Perfection, that's what Mao tried, is perfection. Look what he got, millions and millions of dead people. So I have no idea how we would get to a better state. And if I did, of course, we would want to know it immediately. But I think one of my first games after the Time Machine was the first Deus Ex. A game I absolutely adored. It's coming out in a new version soon. And at the end of that game, you have to make a choice. Should you have the world ruled by a little committee, or should you yourself, now a superhero, run the world? Or should you get rid of all the connections and go back into little villages? And I think there's one other choice, and you have to make that choice. And then you're choosing what the outcome. I chose the little villages. Go back to the little villages. Start again.
I think Vonnegut at one point wrote about that being, in his mind, the optimal scenario for humanity, is small folk societies.
Well, it would be, so look, humans evolve like every other animal, and one thing that sometimes happens in animals, one body part gets too big. Often it's like pretty stuff to attract females. In our case, our heads got too big. We think it's a great virtue, but when you look no species is screwed up the way we have. There's no other that have gotten this close to putting the whole world extinct. So we are not Homo sapiens. Now, one scenario is that we won't go extinct. By the way, life on Earth isn't going extinct. It'll last way past us. But we could go back. I mean, if we keep going where we're going to go, lots of people are going to die. Right? Especially if we get rid of all the vaccines and don't prepare for the next pandemic, and don't do anything about climate change, where immigration gets to be so big, if we go back to barbarian wars, well, what will happen is we'll go back to smaller communities that have to sustain each other. And then we'll start again. And hopefully we'll say, let's not inshitify this time. There's a thing in the book Tribes, and a guy was in Sarajevo when they were under the biggest, longest siege in modern history. So in the war, the city was closed down, no food, total devastation. Everybody, rich, poor, is in the same boat now. There's nothing in and out. They're being under siege. People are dying right and left. And guess what happened? Status didn't matter anymore. Wealth didn't matter anymore, and they found out everybody treated each other much better. And even though it was one of the worst experiences any group of human has ever done, when the siege was lifted and Sarajevo became again a middle-class cosmopolitan place, people scribbled on the walls, "It was better when we were under siege."
Wow.
That tells you something about human beings. The thing that really kills human beings is our obsession with status. And when it disappears, we become pretty good people. The whole message in the New Testament is don't pay attention to status. Poor people are just as important as anybody else, maybe more so. And if you're paying attention to status, you're in the wrong world. Now, again, that's a message we don't like to hear. But isn't it compelling that a group of people went through such horrors that it was better than living in this world of such inequality and falseness? Yeah, So they found their utopia. It was their worst experience because they found their humanity.
Wow. Well, I'll be thinking about that for the rest of the day.
Okay, good. Good. Well, so I'm probably not going to be here for the 40th anniversary of.
I'm not sure I'll be here for the 40th anniversary.
I think you will be, Dan. You know, but sustaining there won't be electricity, but you'll be here.
We'll be the best purveyor of educational sticks and stones games.
Yes,
yeah,
for our small village.
Hey, you can make an educational item out of anything.
That's right.
If Filament had to design games around sticks, you bet they would be good.
All right, that's going right on the.
All righty, I think we've done it.
Yeah, I do have one.
Congratulations! You tell Dan Norton congratulations. And
absolutely.
you guys, I'm proud as hell of you.
Thank you, Jim.
Well, thank you so much. You've been extremely generous with your time today. So
Thank you.
Really appreciate having this conversation with you. I just have one final question for you.
Okay.
Just to see, because I think a lot of people in our space look to you as almost a mythological figure, you know, having started a lot of this. So if there was one message,
as dead, yeah.
If there was one message,
the speaking dead, yes.
a deified figure, if you will, an ascended figure. If there's one message you could give to present and future educational game developers, what would it be?
Save the world. It's too late to make money, too late to try to get status. You have a gift. Save the world. And if you fail, we're gamers. We know that failing is learning, failing is good. What's the sin is not trying. And if all you're doing when people are suffering the way they are today is making a little thing to make profit, then you're not going to heaven. So think big, take risks, and one of you will save the world.